So that's the right approach that we need to take. Generally, this is where you get more certainty. This is where you derive truth in this sense. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. I mean, okay, so I can skip this.
Yeah, brother
Okay.
Khalid,
Yes.
according, you were talking about the science. Now let me ask you a scientific question. According to the quantum mechanics, microscopic events may be fundamentally, probabilistic, but probability itself is not random in the absolute sense. It operates within a well-defined mathematical framework governed by the laws of the physics. This raises a deeper question: where did those laws come from? Can the laws of nature account for their own existence, or they do deny require an explanation beyond themselves? Brother Khalid, many physicists and the cosmologists, they argue that the universe and its laws came into existence together with the Big Bang, meaning the laws did not exist before the Big Bang, before the Big Bang and the universe. But if space-time itself began with the Big Bang, then what does it even mean to say before the Big Bang? Is before a meaningless concept because time itself is originated then, or is there a deeper metaphysical reality that is beyond space and time? Because from a theistic perspective, if God is timeless and immaterial, how should we understand act of creation? Did God create the universe from ex nihilo, out of nothing? And if so, what does nothing mean in a rigorous philosophical and scientific sense? Because since all the physical processes require energy, fields, or matter, how can the origin of the physical universe be understood without presupposing any any physical substrate? So finally, does the modern cosmology merely describe the evolution of the universe from its earliest observable state, or can it genuinely explain why there are laws of the nature at all instead of no laws and no universe, brother Khalid?
Okay. So there was a
Did
lot
you-
there.
no,
So yeah.
this
So
is the most important question that is asked by many intellectual people that live surrounded me.
okay. So let me understand what your question is. So when you were asking about laws of nature themselves, do they require an explanation beyond themselves, right? That is what the
Yeah,
question is. You won't. So alhamdulillah, like the slides that was prepared, I thought the primary focus of would be that argument in itself. But regardless, inshallah, maybe we could have another discussion where I will cover this in detail. So I would just
yeah,
go back to what I was explaining, and then I will come to this question. And also,
yeah,
there was another question that you asked me, if I'm not mistaken, was I think connected to how to make a case for God's existence. If I'm not mistaken, right?
yeah,
You had,
exactly. Exactly.
right.
That
So
was the
we,
question.
yeah.
That
So
was the
we will try
question.
to cover each and every question, inshallah.
Yeah,
So let me just finish what I'm saying. I won't go through the slides or anything, but let me just explain what my case was. So I was trying to
yeah,
build on explaining what all data points we have. So one data point, the first data point that I wanted to cover is that within nature there are laws that are orderly and consistent. Okay, if there are
yeah,
laws that are orderly and consistent, this is not something that science tells you. This is something that science presupposes, because science itself as a subject has to start off with the assumption that nature has laws. Those laws are orderly and consistent, and that's where science is able to predict things. So let's say, like now, right now, with the particular pressure, if I'm boiling water, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Okay, so science would make it as a blanket statement that yes, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, because science is starting off with this assumption, this axiomatic assumption that yes, laws of nature are orderly and consistent. So for the whole field of science, it has to assume that nature itself has orderly and consistent laws. That makes reality intelligible in a way. Intelligible as in now, then we can understand and then we can make predictions. So
yeah,
that is the main important data point. That's data point number one. Then you have data point number two, that the whole universe is fine tuned. Data point, which everyone knows, so I'm not going to go there. It's very clear.
yeah.
It's very common nowadays, common language. Another
Cheers.
point is that nature, that it's not just that nature is fine tuned, but Robin Collins, one of the leading philosophers, he mentioned that it is
Yeah.
like there is fine tuning within fine tuning. Why? Because it's not just fine tuned, but the fact that it's tuned in a way where we can understand that it is fine tuned. Because our ability to do science is also because universe is fine tuned in a way, and it's fine tuned us in a way where we have the ability to do science in the first place. So that's another data point. Another data point is the whole laws of nature are written in the language of mathematics. Like this is a cosmic
Yeah.
language in itself, right?
Exactly.
Then if you move on, then you have, like, you have argument from reason, the fact that we can reason, the fact that we have consciousness, the fact that we are born with an innate disposition to see purpose in nature, and also an innate disposition to believe in God. That's a data point. Then you can add in on top which contingency argument, why reality exists in the first place. Where a contingency argument explains that, okay, yeah, why you have this kind of contingent reality in the first place. That's a data point. Then you have natural beauty. That's another data point. Then there are soul building experiences. That's another data point. I can just go on and on. Now, if you keep all of these data points together and go back to the elephant example, okay, for each and every explanation, that the answer that we will give is God, 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 God. Why is there, why are there laws in nature that are orderly and consistent? God, because we have an explanation of that. Okay, why is the universe fine-tuned? Because we believe in ontologically something. If God exists, then okay, this becomes likely, fine-tuning becomes likely, orderly nature, orderly natural laws become likely, fine-tuning within fine-tuning becomes likely, natural beauty becomes likely. And it makes sense that we will have this innate disposition to see purpose in nature, and to have a natural disposition to believe in God, because God exists, so God can give us that. Then you have the contingency argument to explain, okay, that the necessary being has to exist. Then you can move on and on and on with consciousness, the fact that we have consciousness, which you cannot explain from a materialistic perspective. Again, God explains all of these, and all of the argument of reason, I explained all of them. Now take atheism. From an atheistic perspective, you might come up with an ad hoc explanation for fine tuning. Then you might come up with an ad hoc explanation for fine tuning within fine tuning. Then you might come up with an ad hoc explanation for why the laws of nature exist in the first place. Then you might have to come up with an ad hoc explanation for consciousness, reason, the fact that we have a natural disposition to believe in God and see purpose in design in nature. When you see that, the whole atheistic explanation would be more like a contriving conspiracy theory. So because it won't be able to explain reality, it would just give you ad hoc explanations to make sense of the data, which is not expected in that worldview. So from that perspective, theism makes sense of reality and atheism does not. That's the kind of argument that I wanted to bring in. And I mean, of course, I can talk hours and hours about it, but I'll move on to your question specifically. Now, you were asking me about your question. Now, if we keep this in mind and then move on to how do we make sense of laws of nature, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm not getting to your real question, is that in simple terms, I understood your question to be, where do laws of nature come from? Like, and how do we explain the
Yes,
laws of nature in
exactly.
the first
Where
place?
do laws
Right?
of nature come from? Before the Big Bang.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is where science, I think, hits a brick wall. Why? Because I will explain. So just keep laws of nature aside. I'll explain that within our life there are two types of explanation. Two types of explanation, as in two types of causal explanation. So something like, one is a mechanistic explanation, and one is a volitional explanation, an explanation based on will. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's say you and me, we both are in the kitchen, and the water is boiling, and then you're like, why is the water boiling? I can give you two causal explanation. Okay, one is will based, agency based, like volitional explanation. One is a mechanistic explanation. The will based volitional explanation would be, is because the thermal energy from the heat stove is being transferred to the water molecules and making the water molecules more rigorous. And as soon as the water molecule becomes more rigorous, they are turning from liquid state to gaseous state. That is where the water is boiling. That is the mechanism. That is one explanation, one causal explanation. Another is, I would say, the water is boiling because I am making tea for you. That is also valid, right? Because yes, I
Yeah,
have caused
exactly.
it. I have caused the water to boil because I have a reason to do that, even though there's a mechanism involved to reach that state. And then it's because I want to I want to make tea for you and myself. So the same way, causal explanation are two types, and sometimes you find only one explanation, sometimes you find both explanations. In reality, generally when agents are concerned, you find both explanations. So just like, when atheists have a problem, do a very big conflation between mechanism and agency. So let's say when in the Quran, like an atheist is reading the Quran and he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah is the one who produces rain. Allah is the one who is giving rain. Like, no, that's scientific, that's unscientific, because we have the water cycle to bring out the rain. Like, no, that's nonsense, because there are two types of causal explanation. One is a mechanistic explanation, one is an agency. Just because you give a mechanistic explanation does not mean that the agency explanation does not exist. But those atheists, they don't realize that, okay, yeah, just because I give a mechanistic explanation does not mean that I've already proven that the agency does not exist. That's nonsense, to be very honest. So this is where you find so many explanations in nature. You can get a mechanical explanation, but there will still be an agency explanation. Just like the tea example I gave you. So like when I'm making tea, when I told you that, I'm making tea for you, like, no, you are not responsible for the water boiling, because what is responsible for water boiling is thermal energy, not me. But that makes no sense, because they could both go hand in hand. Once we understand that, one thing to keep in mind is, okay, now if you're trying to go at the beginning state of the universe, okay, trying to go back to the first physical state of the universe. This is the first physical state of the universe. Remember, mechanistic explanation, how they work. I hope I'm not going too fast, right? If anything is not making sense, do let me know, okay? Yeah. So mechanical explanation always try to give you a prior mechanistic causal explanation. That, okay, there has to be a prior mechanistic causal explanation to this, like for the sun, formation of the sun, okay, for the formation of the earth. But if you go back and if someone has actually reached the first physical state of the universe, now there is a lot of debate within cosmology regarding if they're like, about the first physical state of the universe. But for our explanation, for our purposes, we'll just assume, okay, there is a first physical state of the universe. Now, if there is a first physical state of the universe, if you're asking me what is prior to that first physical state of the universe, then when we had these two explanations, one would fail. The mechanistic explanation hits a brick wall. Why does it hit a brick wall? Is because that is the first physical state of the universe. If that is the first physical state of the universe, prior to that state, there cannot be anything materialistically causing. If it is, then that is the first physical state of the universe, not this. But if there is a first physical state of the universe and there's nothing materialistically prior to it, and this is where science hits a brick wall. This is where one type of explanation has failed, but that does not mean that the other has also failed. The other explanation is what I had told you, agency-based volitional explanation. So agency-based and volitional explanation can still make sense of a first physical state of the universe, or like a first initial state of the universe, whereas a mechanistic explanation cannot. Science only dwells in the mechanistic explanation. So if there was a first physical state of the universe, then science would hit a brick wall, and then you can only rely on a will-based explanation for the first physical state of the universe. That's point number one, okay? Point number two, regarding time that you were mentioning, that is all, to be very honest, crap. Many scientists don't realize that there is something known as philosophy and philosophy of time. And within philosophy of time, there are different notions of time. And the scientist is just restricted himself to, like, space-time, where we have in general relativity and special relativity.
Brother Khalid, before 10 raised power minus 24.
Right. So when it comes to time, first of all, there are various issues with saying that, okay, there was no time prior to it, so it makes no sense. But because we have something known as metaphysical time, so if there is something like metaphysical time, you can, even prior to the universe, there could be something like time existing. So that's not problematic, because you can talk about something like metaphysical time. But also the fact that there was nothing prior to the Big Bang, and then the Big Bang happened, becomes self-defeating in some way, where, like, you are talking about the Big Bang and there's nothing prior to the Big Bang, and then you're saying that it makes no sense to say anything beyond the Big Bang. Then what you are advocating for, in some sense, that becomes questionable in a way. Now that's